A 16-year-old girl is in her bedroom on a Thursday morning. Her last text message was sent at 11 o'clock. And then after that message to her boyfriend, no one ever heard from her again. By the time her family realizes something is wrong, the man who took her had already been sitting in her family's living room, accepting condolences and squeezing the hands of people who were weeping for the girl he had just murdered.
Bex, if you can see this, get in contact. And if anyone out there knows something, just tell us. Just bring her home safe. If you've got her, then put her somewhere we can find her. We want her home, please.
And for the next 12 days, while her father stood in front of cameras begging the public for help finding his little girl, that man stood right beside him. This is the story of Rebecca Marie Watts, a young woman of boundless warmth and enormous dreams, and it is the story of how the investigation into her death would crack open something nobody in the quiet Bristol suburb of St. George was remotely prepared for. Rebecca Marie Watts, known to nearly everyone as Becky, was born on June 3, 1998, to Tanya Watts and Darren Galsworthy. She grew up in St. George, a close, working residential pocket on the eastern side of Bristol, England. And for most of her life, she lived at 18 Crown Hill with her father, Darren Galsworthy, and later, his new wife, Angie. As a young child, Becky was shy to the point of being almost invisible in a room full of people. Lucy Trutch, who taught her for 2 years at Summerhill Junior School, remembered her as incredibly shy and incredibly quiet. It wasn't until the later years of primary school, Lucy recalled, that Becky slowly began coming out of her shell. That process was not an easy one. At secondary school, Becky was bullied, and in her early teenage years, she developed anorexia, a struggle that consumed roughly a year of her life. During hospital treatment for the illness, she formed 2 close friendships that would carry her through some of her hardest years. By the time she turned 16, those who knew Becky described a young woman who bore little resemblance to the withdrawn child of a few years earlier. She was still quiet in unfamiliar company, but among the people she trusted, she was warm, funny, and fiercely loyal. Her friend, Courtney Bicker, remembered spending afternoons together listening to music, and later described Becky simply as full of life, a happy person. Becky had a boyfriend, Luke, who by every account treated her well. She had good friends and a clear idea of what she wanted next. She hoped to study interior design once she finished school. Becky's home life, like many families, had its complications. Her parents, Darren Galsworthy and Tanya Watts, were no longer together, and Becky lived with her father. Her mother and her older brother, Daniel, lived separately. Daniel remained close to her throughout her life. Her father, Darren, had since remarried. His wife, Angie, lived with multiple sclerosis, a condition that affected her mobility and required regular care and support around the house. Angie brought her own son into the family, Nathan Matthews, born January 9, 1987. When Angie moved in with Darren, Nathan, who was already grown, continued living nearby with his own grandmother rather than relocate with her. Even so, in Becky's earliest years, the 2 step-siblings were close. By 2015, that early closeness had faded into something far more distant. Nathan and Becky were, by most descriptions, more like housemates on visiting days than siblings. They weren't even connected on Facebook. And yet the trust between Nathan and Becky's father ran deep enough that when Darren married Angie in 2013, he chose his stepson to stand beside him as his best man. Nathan, by then, had a long-term girlfriend, Shauna Hoare. The two had met in 2008 when Nathan was 21 and Shauna was just 14, a detail that would take on grim significance only years later, once a jury heard the full picture of who Nathan Matthews was. But problems in Nathan and Shauna's relationship existed almost from the start, hidden beneath the surface of an otherwise unremarkable young couple. By 2015, Shauna, now 21, worked as Angie's carer, visiting the Crown Hill house regularly, typically Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, to help with tasks Angie's condition made difficult to manage alone. She and Nathan lived together on Cotton Mill Lane in Barton Hill, a few miles from Becky's home. As far as Darren and Angie knew, Thursday, February 19, 2015, was going to be an ordinary day. The night before, Becky spent the evening at a Skittles night at Barton Hill Rugby Club with friends. She stayed the night at a friend's house afterward, and at around 8:30 the next morning she was back home. Nathan and Shauna were already planning to visit the house that day. Although their usual schedule brought them by on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, this Thursday gave them a different reason to come. What no one knew was what Nathan had packed into his car before leaving his house. That morning, CCTV cameras recorded Nathan and Shauna inside a Tesco supermarket, buying batteries. Investigators would later determine those batteries were meant for 2 stun guns Nathan had brought with him, along with handcuffs, tape, and a mask. From the statement he later gave to the police, he had, in his own words, developed an idea to scare Becky, a plan he claimed to stage a fake kidnapping as punishment for behavior he said was upsetting his mother, including leaving items on the floor and, because of Angie's condition, could trip her over. At around 11:15 that morning, Angie left the house for a medical appointment, leaving Becky alone at home, which was normal. Shortly afterward, Nathan and Shauna let themselves in, using a spare key kept in a recycling box outside. What happened in the minutes that followed has never been fully established, and much of what is known comes only from Nathan's own statement. But what forensic evidence did establish is this: a violent struggle took place in Becky's bedroom. Blood was later found spattered across a door frame at different heights. A post-mortem examination found more than 40 separate injuries on Becky's body, evidence that she had fought for her life. She was suffocated. A pathologist's findings that her nose and mouth had been covered with considerable sustained force directly contradicted Nathan's later claim to police that he had strangled her, a discrepancy that cast doubt over how much of his account could be trusted at all. After Becky died, her body was placed in the boot of Nathan's car, which had been reversed into the driveway. At around 2:45 that afternoon, Angie returned home. Nathan and Shauna stayed at the house for hours afterward, behaving as though nothing had happened, while Becky's body remained in the car parked just outside. Later that afternoon, Becky's boyfriend Luke came by the house. He hadn't heard from her all day and wanted to check in. Angie told him she didn't think Becky was in. He left without ever knowing what and who he had just walked past. Just after 6 o'clock that evening, Nathan and Shauna got into the car and drove back to their house with Becky's body still in the boot. That night, they ordered a Chinese takeaway from the restaurant where Nathan worked as a delivery driver and settled in for the evening as though it had been an unremarkable Thursday. The next morning, Friday, February 20th, Nathan called in sick to work, telling his employer he was having car trouble. In reality, over the hours that followed, he began cutting off Becky's body in the bathroom of his house, using a knife and a circular saw he purchased that same day, a transaction later captured on CCTV in which he was seen haggling with a shop assistant over the price. Back at Crown Hill, Darren and Angie grew increasingly anxious as the day wore on and Becky failed to come home or answer her phone. At around 4 o'clock that afternoon, they reported her missing. Investigators quickly noted something troubling. Becky's phone, laptop, and tablet were all gone from her room, yet she hadn't taken any money or a change of clothes, and she hadn't told a single person, not her boyfriend, not her closest friends, that she was planning to go anywhere. When police visited the house and took down the initial details, Darren came away with the impression that officers suspected a teenage runaway. It was a conclusion that never sat right with him, and he began making calls of his own to everyone who might know where his daughter was. Becky's mother, Tanya, told him she hadn't seen her daughter in nearly 3 weeks. Over the following 2 days, as concern deepened, Nathan and Shauna were recorded on CCTV inside a store buying rubble sacks, cling film, and cleaning products. On Sunday, February 22nd, the police issued their first public appeal for information. The following day, Darren Galsworthy and Angie appeared together at a press conference, appealing directly to Becky to come home. Within days, the case had gone from a local story to a national one. The hashtag #FindBecky spread across social media platforms, eventually reaching more than 2 million people. Police searched the pond at St. George's Park, Troopers Hill Nature Reserve, and properties across Barton Hill and Southmead. Community volunteers organized their own searches through fish ponds, Trime Valley, and Badock's Wood, printing hundreds of leaflets bearing Becky's photograph and going door to door. Meanwhile, Nathan and Shauna were brought in and interviewed as witnesses to the investigation. Both told police the same story, that on the day Becky disappeared, they'd heard her come stomping down the stairs, heard the front door slam, and assumed she had simply left the house in a bad mood. As the search entered its second week, police attention increasingly turned toward the two people who had been inside the house that day. On Saturday, February 28th, Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare were arrested on suspicion of kidnap. 2 days later, on Monday, March 2nd, they were rearrested, this time on suspicion of murder. That evening at Southmead Police Station, police told Nathan of the blood found in Becky's room and that they also found a fingerprint. Realizing that the forensic evidence might completely trap him, Nathan panicked during his police interview. Knowing it was only a matter of time before they found the remains or something else, he had his lawyer hand over a prepared written statement confessing to the killing. In it, he admitted responsibility for Becky's death and told officers exactly where her remains could be found, inside a shed at the back of a garden on Barton Court in Barton Hill, a property belonging to people known to the couple. The following day, police confirmed that human remains recovered at the address were Becky's. In a statement released through police, Darren and Angie said the news was too much to bear and asked that Becky be treated with a due reverence while the family tried to come to terms with their grief in private.
To dismember a human body is a very, very unusual occurrence, and for it to happen in these circumstances after a stepbrother kills his stepsister is just despicable and brutal.
On March 4th, Nathan Matthews was formally charged with murder. 2 days later, 2 other people connected to the Barton Court property, Carl Demetrius and his partner Jadine Parsons, were charged with assisting an offender, accused of helping to conceal Becky's remains. Shauna Hoare, initially charged only with perverting the course of justice, would not be formally charged with murder until June 22nd, once investigators had built a fuller picture of her role. On April 17, 2015, Becky's funeral was held at St. Ambrose Church in Whitehall, Bristol. Her family chose to frame the day not as one of mourning alone, but as an occasion to celebrate Becky's life. Hundreds of people from the local community attended. In the weeks that followed, hundreds more turned out to march across Bristol's city center in Becky's memory, braving heavy rain, wearing T-shirts and badges printed with her photograph, and releasing balloons into the sky above the crowd. The funeral service began with a tribute written by Darren Galsworthy, Becky's father. In it, he described how his daughter was so shy as a child that his wife took up work at her school so she would not have to attend alone. As she grew older, she helped younger pupils overcome confidence problems, he added. Although still very shy herself, she would still watch out for any child who stood in the playground looking lost and scared. She would encourage them to join her little mentor group. That was Becky all over. She couldn't make friends herself, but didn't want younger children to feel like she did. We received letters from the parents of these children thanking us for all our big-hearted girl did. As a teenager, Becky overcame every problem she ever faced with the help of friends who were at the funeral. You guys helped her in a way we couldn't, and we are eternally grateful for what you did for her. Becky has left a huge void in our lives and touched the hearts of the nation. We all loved you so much, and as you look down from heaven, just look at what your short life has achieved. Not bad for a shy girl. You will forever be in our hearts and thoughts. Rest in peace, Angel of Bristol. The trial of Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare began on October 6, 2015 at Bristol Crown Court. Over the following 6 weeks, the jury examined more than 1,200 pieces of evidence. The case was ultimately decided by a jury of 10 women and 1 man. Matthews admitted responsibility for Becky's death, but denied the charge of murder. His defense argued that the kidnapping had been intended as a cruel prank to frighten his stepsister into changing her behavior. According to his account, her death occurred unintentionally during a struggle, and he insisted he had never planned to kill her. He also claimed that Shauna had been outside in the garden at the time and was not involved in Becky's death. Shauna denied any involvement in the crime. She told the court she had no knowledge of any plan to harm Becky. Addressing text messages exchanged with Nathan in the months before the incident that discussed kidnapping scenarios, she claimed the conversations had been sarcastic, inappropriate jokes rather than evidence of a genuine plan. The prosecution presented a different interpretation of the evidence. Prosecutors argued that Nathan and Shauna shared an unhealthy fixation on adolescent-themed material. They referred to adult content recovered from their electronic devices featuring performers in school uniform costumes as evidence supporting that claim. The prosecution also highlighted that Nathan and Shauna's relationship had begun when Shauna was 14 and Nathan was 21, arguing that it reflected a broader pattern of behavior relevant to the case. Then came the physical evidence. CCTV footage tracked the couple's movements before and after Becky's death, including trips to buy batteries, a circular saw, and cleaning supplies. DNA evidence linked both Nathan and Shauna to items found in the shed where Becky's remains were discovered. A forensic expert also told the jury that dismembering a body would have been much easier for two people than for one. The prosecution used that testimony to challenge Shauna's claim that she had spent the entire time outside in the garden. On November 11, 2015, after about 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdicts. Nathan Matthews was found guilty of murder. Shauna Hoare was cleared of murder but found guilty of manslaughter. Both were also convicted of conspiracy to kidnap, perverting the course of justice, preventing the lawful burial of a body, and possessing 2 stun guns. Outside the courthouse, Tanya Watts and Becky's brother read a statement to the waiting media. They remembered Becky as vibrant, funny, and fiercely loyal to the people she cared about. They described her as like a tornado, hurricane, and sunbeam all at once. They ended with a message for parents everywhere: pay close attention to your children. 2 days later, on November 13th, Justice James Sinders sentenced Nathan Matthews to life in prison with a minimum term of 33 years before he can be considered for parole. Shauna Hoare was sentenced to 17 years in prison. During sentencing, the judge said he believed the kidnapping had been planned for a sexual purpose. Addressing Nathan directly, he said he had a fixation with having sex with petite teenage girls, and added that he believed Shauna had become involved in carrying out the plan. Before finishing, the judge also spoke directly to Becky's family, praising the dignity and strength they had shown throughout the trial and acknowledging the enormous pain they had endured. People in the courtroom later said he appeared visibly emotional as he delivered his closing remarks. Earlier that day, in a victim impact statement read to the court, Darren Galsworthy tried to put into words the moment he learned his daughter was dead. He said it felt like being cast off a cliff into despair. For Angie, it was worst because everything carried an unbearable weight. Speaking afterward to a newspaper, she said she hated what he had become, but that she could not stop loving the child she had raised. On February 5, 2016, Carl Demetrius and Jadine Parsons, the couple who owned the property where Becky's remains had been hidden, were sentenced for assisting an offender. Carl received 2 years in prison, while Jadine received 16 months. In February 2016, a wooden memorial bench, carved by local craftsmen, was unveiled close to Becky's home in a green space known as Goat's Field. A mural in her memory was later painted nearby. The following month, Darren Galsworthy published a memoir about his daughter's life and the years that followed her death, hoping, in his words, to take back some control over how she would be remembered. In June 2016, the Court of Appeal rejected applications from both Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare to challenge their convictions and sentences, finding no reasonable argument that either had been unsafe or excessive. More than a decade later, people in St. George still remember the eerie silence that settled over the neighborhood. It was the kind of quiet that only comes when an entire community is holding its breath, searching for someone they desperately hope they'll find. But by then, Becky was already gone. What has stayed with people even more isn't the tragedy itself, it's Becky, the girl behind the stories. She was shy at first, but little by little she grew into herself. She loved music, treasured her friends, and brought an energy that was impossible to ignore. Her family said she moved through the lives of the people who loved her like a tornado, a hurricane, and a sunbeam all at the same time. And somehow that description still feels like the best way to remember her. Thanks for watching. Please take a second to leave a comment on what you think about this case. It genuinely helps these stories stay in front of people who needs to hear it. That is all for today's story. Like, share, and subscribe. It's totally free. Thank you, and stay safe out there.